Story number 1. I guess to tell this story properly, I need to give you a little background. Currently, I'm a student at university. I won't say where, but I will tell you that I'm majoring in 3 subjects and minoring in 5 more. So you could say I'm really busy. My parents weren't particularly keen on letting me stay in any of the on-campus dorms. Not that there's anything wrong with them. They just saw most universities as a collection of bad influences and wanted me as far away from all of that as possible in order for me to focus on my studies. I didn't complain or argue. You see, some people like to describe me as antisocial. It's not that I'm against socializing, I'm just no good at it. I'm shy, weird, and get really closed off when I'm around people I don't really know. When my parents offered to rent me my own place near the campus, I couldn't have been happier. Anyway, we looked for a while and found a small loft apartment about a block away from the campus. It was cozy, quiet, and small. It was basically the perfect place for me. There wasn't much history around the place, and we weren't able to find out much about the previous tenants or even the owners. Some old guy was renting it out through the bank, and that was all we could find out. I wasn't put off by this. It was just a place for me to study and sleep. Now, I guess I better get to the story. I didn't notice anything strange about the place when I moved in. The wooden floorboards creaked when I walked on them, the wind rattled the windows, and I was sharing the space with a family of spiders. It wasn't anything my favorite carpet and a picture or two couldn't fix. It wasn't until I started my lectures that I noticed something was really wrong. I spent most of the day out and always locked the door when I left. I'm not sure what made me notice it at first, but one day when I came back from my lectures, I saw that one of my pictures had been moved. I hung up a painting of a bridge over a river and another painting of a snowy forest on either side of one of the windows. The painting hadn't just moved a little bit on its hook, it had been taken off its hook completely and placed on the other side of the room. I remember staring at it for a while and wondering how long it had been like that. I tried to remember if I had moved it, but I hadn't. I knew that I hadn't. I was almost certain that it was hanging beside the other painting before I left that morning as well. At that point, I completely freaked out and called my father. He drove the whole 4 hours to come and check on me. He checked the whole house, but he couldn't find any evidence that someone had broken in. Besides, who would break in just to move a painting across the room and not take anything? I felt stupid. My father left, assuring me that I shouldn't feel bad and that there's nothing wrong with being cautious or alert. I dropped the matter, but I shouldn't have been so quick to forget about it. A couple of days passed and my studies were getting a lot harder. I ended up spending half my time in lectures and the other half studying for tests. I was struggling. There was this one thing I heard about to help me study. This book suggested using a voice recorder to take down all of my thoughts at night before I go to bed, and then play it in the morning. I was looking for anything I could use to help my studies, so I bought one of those voice recorders that journalists use on my way home. At this point, nothing strange or unusual had happened again. I hadn't come home to find any of my things moved around. Then again, I had convinced myself that I was the one who moved the painting and forgotten about it. If something had been moved around, I probably would have just shrugged it off straight away. I decided to use the voice recorder that night. I sat, studying and reading some of my theories out loud for the recorder. I did this for a few hours before heading to bed. It wasn't until I woke up the next morning that I realized I didn't turn the voice recorder off. It was recording audio the entire night. I wanted to listen to what I had recorded and write it down first before erasing the whole thing, but something strange happened. I got to the end of the recording. I listened to me stop talking, and then the sounds of me packing everything away and tidying up. There was a soft sound of water in the background as I climbed into the shower. I picked up the voice recorder to delete the file. Before I got the chance, I heard something else. I heard another voice. I wasn't sure if I was actually hearing anything at first. My mind could have been playing tricks with me. I could be mistaking the sound of the shower for a distant whisper. So I pressed the speaker up against my ear and listened carefully. What I heard still sends shivers through my body today. I heard a heavy, deep breathing. The breathing was slow and raspy, like that of a smoker. It was so soft that whoever it was couldn't have been standing close to the recorder. They must have been standing in the middle of the room, just breathing. The breathing got louder in my ear until suddenly there was a gasp. I dropped the recorder, or rather, I practically threw it to the ground. There was no way for me to explain it. It freaked me out. I didn't even want to listen to the rest of the audio. I deleted the file and moved on with my day, hoping that it was just a glitch or corruption or something. The next night, I did the same thing. I recorded my thoughts and theories while studying, only I remembered to turn the recorder off when I was done. It wasn't until after I finished showering and was about to hop into bed that I stopped and stared at the voice recorder. A part of me was curious. A part of me wanted to know if it was really a glitch. I turned it on and placed it on the table before I hopped into bed. I had no idea what I would find when I woke up the next morning. I can remember being so restless that night. Something woke me up in the middle of the night. I'm not sure what it was. It could have been a noise or just a feeling. All I know is, when I woke up, I was uneasy. I just lied there, staring up at the ceiling. The worst feeling in the world happened to me that night because, as I was staring into the darkness, it felt like something was staring back at me. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to make a noise. I was paralyzed, frozen in my bed, wide awake, but stuck in a nightmare. I couldn't go back to sleep. I became so aware that there might be someone in the room with me that I convinced myself that there was. I couldn't see anything in the dark. The longer I stared into it, the more my eyes began to play tricks with me. Suddenly, I felt 1,000 eyes staring back at me, and shapeless figures began to form in the corners and up the walls. A cold sweat formed on the back of my neck, and I felt a breeze blowing down there, almost as if someone was standing behind me and breathing down my neck. I leaped out of my bed, throwing the covers aside and practically jumping all the way to the light switch. As I flicked the lights on, it all vanished. A cold glow filled the room, and the feeling of being watched, the feeling that someone else was in the room with me, left as soon as it had formed. I took a moment to breathe, my heart still racing in my chest. How could anyone actually go back to sleep after that? My eyes glanced to the alarm clock on my bedside table, and the warm green numbers read 4 a.m. Only 4 in the morning, I sighed, shaking my head. My classes would have me up in the next 2 hours. There was a part of me that didn't feel quite at ease. I thought about reaching for the light switch and attempting to get a few more moments of sleep, but as I raised my hand, I glanced around the room once more. My hand froze just before reaching the light switch. A pit formed in my stomach and a lump in my throat. As I looked around the room, my eyes were drawn to the red flashing light from the voice recorder on my desk. There was no way I was going back to bed. There was certainly no way I was going to switch the light off as well. I made my way to my desk and sat down. The voice recorder didn't pick up much at first. It was the static of complete silence and my subtle sleep sounds in the background. The memory of the breathing I had heard before played in my mind. I tensed, preparing myself to hear it again. This time, I heard something way worse. I heard a voice, deep and menacing, distinctly different from my own. "Wake up," the voice whispered in a teasing, sing-song way. "Wake up. Hey, wake up." I jumped out of my seat as the soft whisper turned into a loud growl. The voice recorder went quiet after that. I took a step back, staring at it like some kind of ticking time bomb. It wasn't long until I heard the sound of myself jumping out of the bed and flicking the light switch. The voice recorder kept going after that. Even after the sound of me sitting down at my desk and turning the recorder off to listen to it, it didn't stop. It kept playing this eerie, silent static. "Are you awake yet?" I gasped as I heard the voice whisper in my ear. It didn't come from the voice recorder. It came from behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. I was completely alone. I didn't feel alone. I know it might be hard for anyone to believe me, and even I was expecting to wake up at some point after that, but I didn't wake up. I was already awake, and it wasn't some nightmare. I was frozen in place for a long time, longer than I'd like to admit. I decided to leave. I couldn't stay there anymore. I was about to call my father again at 4 in the morning for absolutely nothing. I managed to find one of those 24-hour diners nearby, and they were kind enough to let me stay after I ordered some breakfast. I kind of went about my day after that. I tried to forget about what happened at my house. I went to my classes, spoke with my classmates, and tried my hardest not to think about it, but I couldn't get my mind off that voice recorder. I still, to this day, can't explain what happened. I had the voice recorder checked, and according to the guy at the store, there was nothing wrong with it. I couldn't go back to my house. I tried, but it just didn't feel right. I packed my things and stayed with one of my classmates in their dorm. Eventually, I had to tell my parents what happened and why I couldn't go back to the loft apartment they were renting for me. This is the weirdest part. When I tried to play the voice recordings for them as proof, there was nothing. The only voice that played was my own. The deep, menacing voice yelling at me to wake up was replaced with my own voice saying the same thing. I couldn't explain it, nor could I understand it. Thankfully, my parents could see how disturbed I was by the whole thing. They agreed to let me stay with my classmate in the dorms until they found me another place. I was glad not to go back to that place. I threw the voice recorder away as well. I never had any more problems like that again. If anyone can explain what happened to me, I'd be happy to listen. When I was in school, I wasn't the type of kid that had a huge friend group and was always hanging out with someone. No, I had one friend. The only person I ever talked to and the only one I ever spent time with was my one friend, my best friend, Sarah. Sarah and I were often made fun of, and we didn't really fit in anywhere, so it was only natural that we gravitated towards each other. We had a lot in common, we really cared about each other, and we were often mistaken for being boyfriend and girlfriend, or brother and sister. Halfway through my 3rd year at university, I was arrested under suspicion of her murder. I know what you're probably thinking, but I was proven innocent almost immediately after coming under suspicion. Her actual killer still hasn't been found to this day. Considering that her body was never found, she was thought to be missing. No one knew what happened to her, and her body was never found. The only piece of evidence that exists that proves without a doubt that she was murdered is an old voice message she left me. I didn't know about the voice message until recently. So, up until a few weeks ago, we all still thought that she had run away or she was missing. The day she went missing, I got a text message from her. It wasn't anything special, just a, "Hi, hope your day goes well, can't wait to see you." We had plans to meet up that weekend. However, she went missing days before we even got the chance. I spent the next few months trying to put my life back together. She was my only friend. She meant so much to me. After she went missing, I kind of fell apart. I dropped out of university, went back to my parents' house, and spent the entire time in a depressive episode. It wasn't until months later, when I was starting to put my life back together, that I found the voice message that Sarah had left me the night she went missing. On the day I found it, I had moved back into my apartment my parents had rented for me near the university. No one else had rented the place, so it was basically waiting for me to return. The phone, which was there the 3 years I had been staying there during university, was untouched since the day I left. That was the first thing I checked when I got there early in the morning. I saw the flashing lights, indicating that I had a message. When I pressed it, my entire life was thrown into turmoil once again. At first, there was just silence, and I thought someone had dialed the wrong number. Before I could hang up, I heard screaming. Loud, desperate, and continuous screaming. It was her voice. It was Sarah, screaming at the top of her lungs. I could tell that she was scared and that she needed help. She was crying as well, screaming and crying all at the same time. I just sat there and listened with my heart pounding in my chest. The recording lasted a whole 3 minutes before her last scream was cut out abruptly. The recording continued for a further 7 minutes after that, but there was just static before it was eventually cut off. Of course, I had no idea what to do at this point. I was shocked. I had just heard my best friend being murdered. I was sure of it. Once I overcame my shock, I instantly went to the police. They reopened the investigation after months of her just being missing, but nothing came of it. They didn't find her, they couldn't trace the call, and they still had no further suspects or leads. The case was as cold as it was before I found the recording. The only new piece of information was that she made that call to me on the night she went missing. She was being murdered, and she thought to call me, maybe to ask for help. What was I doing at the time? I was out drinking with some girl I'd met in class earlier that day. I was so hungover the next day that I didn't even think to look at my messages, and after hearing that Sarah had gone missing, my entire life became consumed by trying to find her. I still wonder what would have happened had I actually checked my voicemail. Would it have made a difference? Would we have actually been able to trace the call? Would she still be alive? Story number 1. This one time I was sitting with my daughter on the sofa. We were watching one of her favorite movies because it was the only thing that got her to calm down, and I needed a break. Halfway through the movie, my daughter stood up, slowly turned to look at me, and with the straightest and most serious face ever, she said, "The people buried in the backyard must have died screaming." I stared at her for a moment, still kind of processing what she just said. "Why do you say that?" I asked, not entirely sure which part of the situation I should have questioned. "Because I can still hear them screaming now," she replied. Without saying anything else, she sat down and went back to watching her movie. I was probably frozen to the spot for the next 3 hours. I do not know if there are people buried in my backyard or not, and I'm afraid to check. Story number 2. My son and I were having a tough week, so I decided to treat him to an ice cream when I picked him up after school that Friday. He was so excited. We got our ice cream, headed to the park, and sat on the swings while we ate. He randomly perked up and told me, "You're my favorite mommy." I laughed. "Thank you, but I'm your only mommy," I corrected him. He thought for a moment and shook his head. "No, you're the 4th one, but you're way better than the other ones ever were." He's only 7 years old and finds new ways to creep me out every day. Story number 3. I have 3 children. The 2 oldest are 16 and 13, and my youngest is only 6 years old. They're all girls that love driving their father crazy. One day, he came home from taking them to the mall to buy some new clothes. I wasn't feeling well, so I stayed home. My husband walked into the house, face white as a sheet. My 2 eldest walked in right after him, and their faces were frozen in a look of confusion mixed with terror. When my youngest walked in, she was as happy as can be, humming a little song and skipping all the way to the kitchen. "What happened?" I asked my husband. "You'll never believe what she just said to me," he explained. "We were stopped at a red light and she asked me if I remembered the last time that we died." "What?" I stood up, ready to laugh, but I quickly realized that it wasn't a joke when both my eldest daughters started nodding their heads. "She said that the last time we died was in a car accident when someone ran the red light," my husband continued. "I'm not driving her to the mall ever again." My husband was pretty shocked after that day, but he got over it and my youngest hasn't said anything similar to that again. Story number 4. I woke up in the middle of the night when my 5-year-old son started shaking me. "What's going on?" I asked him. "There's a monster underneath my bed," he whined. I sighed. This was a normal occurrence, but he usually asks me to check underneath the bed and in the closet before he goes to bed. "Did you have a nightmare?" I asked him, already climbing out of bed. "No, the monster under my bed tried to grab me." Okay, I yawned. "Let's get you back to bed." I took him back to bed, checked his closet and underneath his bed, and then I turned back to him as I was about to turn off the light and shut the door. "There you go. There are no monsters underneath your bed," I told him. "No, it's behind you now." Story number 5. I rushed into the kitchen one day when I heard what sounded like a bunch of glasses and plates smashing on the floor. I found my 10-year-old son standing on top of the counter, grabbing the plates and glasses from the cupboard and throwing them to the floor. "Stop that right now," I yelled at him. "Young man, what the hell do you think you are doing?" He paused, glass in hand, and shrugged his shoulders. "The tall man told me to do it," he said. "What tall man?" "He stands at the foot of my bed every night and watches me sleep." He suddenly looked to the staircase behind me. He's at the top of the stairs right now. Obviously, I looked and there was no one there. I was freaked out and angry, but I know when my son was lying to me, and he wasn't lying that day. Story number 6. My family and I were on Christmas vacation one year. We usually go out to this cabin we own near a lake that freezes over. The children love the snow and ice skating on the lake. One night, we were sitting in front of the fireplace doing the usual, roasting marshmallows, drinking hot chocolate, and telling scary stories. My youngest child, she was only 4 years old at the time, was staring deeply into the fire. "We should set the whole cabin on fire," she suddenly muttered softly as if she was speaking to herself. "What was that?" I asked her. I heard what she said, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't misunderstand or mishear it. She looked at me almost shocked, and with the widest and most innocent smile on her face, she shouted, "Nothing?" Story number 7. I felt really tired one afternoon and decided to lie down for a nap. My daughter was really helpful and offered to tuck me in. She was 9 at the time, so I didn't have any problem with her looking after herself for a while. Her older sister, 16, was in her bedroom and would be able to handle it if anything happened. Anyway, I thought it was really sweet that she wanted to tuck me in. I lied down in bed and let her cover me with the blanket. "Don't worry, Mommy," she said. "I'll always remember you when you're dead." I wasn't exactly sure what to do, and I was really tired, so I didn't really say nor do anything. I let her cover me with the blanket and she walked out. Now I'm kind of worried why she would say something like that, or what she meant by it. Story number 8. I'm a babysitter and I've dealt with some weird and annoying kids over the past few years. This one kid always gives me the creeps. He constantly says the weirdest stuff about how we're all going to die, and people who have already died are still wandering around as ghosts. The one day, while I was putting him to bed, he started saying some creepy stuff again. "You're going to die," he told me. I rolled my eyes. "Everyone's going to die someday," I told him. "Yes, but you're going to die tonight." I paused and my entire body got covered with goosebumps. He simply smiled, said goodnight, and pulled the covers over his head. I told his parents what he said and explained how I didn't want to babysit him ever again. Story number 9. My children are all grown up and have children of their own now. I like to think of myself as the cool grandma, so whenever I have them over, I try to make each visit as fun and memorable as possible. I decided to take my grandchildren on a hike one day. I'm still quite active in my old age, and the trail I took them on was a very easy one. Halfway down the trail, my 7-year-old grandson glanced over his shoulder and stopped dead in his tracks. He seemed to be staring at something behind us, but when I looked, there was nothing and no one there. "What's wrong?" I asked him. "Those people keep following us," he told me. I looked all around, but I didn't see anyone. We were completely alone. "Who's following us?" I asked him. "The weird people with the nasty smiles," he said, pointing to the empty trail behind us. "I don't like their smiles." "What's wrong with their smiles?" I giggled, thinking this is a game that he's playing. "They have way too many teeth and they're way too sharp." He took a step back and I really took notice of the fear in his face. "I don't like them. They look mean. Tell them to stop following us." Safe to say, I gathered my grandkids up and headed back home as quickly as possible. When I asked my grandson about the people again, he simply shrugged and said, "They stopped following us, but they're still waiting in the woods somewhere." Story number 10. "I promise I'll never cook you for dinner and eat you," said my 4-year-old daughter randomly one night at the dining table. "Even if I get really, really hungry." We were just about to sit down for dinner. I burned the first batch of chicken nuggets, so dinner was about an hour late that night. I'm guessing the extra hour wait made her really hungry. Story number 11. I'm 17 years old, and I have 3 siblings. The youngest 2 are 6 and 8. One day, they were running around and playing in their bedroom while I was walking past to get to mine. "Ow!" I heard one of them cry out, followed by a loud thud. I sighed, realizing that I had to do something because my mother would never let me hear the end of it if one of them was hurt and I didn't do anything. I walked into their room. "What happened?" I asked. The 6-year-old was lying on the floor and the 8-year-old was standing on the opposite side of the room. "He pushed me," the 6-year-old cried. I instantly turned to my 8-year-old brother. "Why did you push your sister to the floor?" I asked him. "Not him," my little sister corrected me. "The mean boy pushed me." "What mean boy?" I asked. The room was clearly empty aside from the two of them. "He hides in my closet," she told me. "He's really mean." I looked to the 8-year-old and he was kind of nodding in agreement. There was no one in the closet and it wasn't the last time they talked about the mean boy. They both said that he comes out at night and turns the light off because he's stronger in the dark. I haven't really had a peaceful night since, especially when I wake up in the middle of the night and find that their nightlight has been turned off. Story number 12. "I wish I had a piece of you to carry around with me always," was something that my 11-year-old daughter said to me one day. I thought it was sweet, so I went to an old Bits and Bob's store down the street and bought a cute little locket. I cut off some of my hair and put it inside the locket. I then gave it as a gift to my daughter. "What is it?" she asked. "It's a locket with my hair inside it," I explained. "Now you can carry a piece of me around with you." She smiled and shook her head. "Thank you," she said, "but I wanted something a little bit bigger. Maybe something like your finger or even your eye." She then gave the locket back to me and walked away. Story number 13. My wife and I were driving in the car with our 10-year-old son. He was looking out the window, watching all the people walking on the sidewalk. Suddenly, he sat back and sighed. "I can't wait till I'm old enough to drive," he said. "Oh yeah?" I chuckled. "Yeah," he grunted. "Then I can get a big car and drive into everyone." Story number 14. I had 3 dogs and 2 cats before I fell pregnant with my first child. When she was born, we made sure to raise her alongside the animals and teach her how to treat them properly. She came to love them like her own siblings. One day, she walked up to me while I was reading. "Mommy, the dogs are supposed to protect us, right?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "The dogs protect us from all the bad people. So, is the man that crawls on the ceiling at night not bad?" Story number 15. I caught my son using the hose to pour water over an anthill in the garden one day. I know they're just ants, but I didn't want to stand by and let it happen. I always thought that if he was comfortable torturing something as small as an ant, then it wouldn't stop him from doing bad things to animals and even people. I took the hose away from him and scolded him. "But Mom," he whined, "if we don't stop them before they get too strong, they'll carry us away in our sleep and eat us alive." Story number 16. I gave my daughter a plate of cookies and a glass of milk as a treat on a Saturday afternoon. She took them to her room and came back a few minutes later asking for another glass of milk. "Did you finish the first one?" I asked her. "No," she shook her head. "The girl in my room wants a glass of milk as well." She didn't have any friends over at the time, and she never had an imaginary friend up until that point. "Who's the girl in your room?" I asked her. "I don't know. She crawled out from underneath my bed and asked to play with me." I gave her a second glass of milk. "I don't like her though. She doesn't have any eyes and it's kind of scary." She took the glass of milk and ran off to her room, leaving me standing in the kitchen speechless and confused.